There we go.
Okay, we are.
That's working.
So anyway, what were you saying?
Oh, I was just saying, like, so on my retreat, I went through like a couple of the like insight cycles that are so talked about in pragmatic dharma and our stream entry um, and and every time you go through one of those things, in my experience, it does produce a new baseline of perception, a new baseline of relationship, direct contact with your senses, insight into anatta. But it also, suffering becomes way more intense and apparent, and so you have to like kind of be on guard, and all that kind of perceptual change is cool and all, but it's not really it doesn't really do anything. It's more that you see things more clearly, so you watch your step more, I guess, in every moment. And I like it.
Precisely.
And I
I
think,
would say that the awareness of it goes up, but
yes,
that the intensity comes down.
yes,
In other words, it's delivered in far more often packages, but the packages are smaller than they used to be. They used to come wallopus. Now they just that.
yeah. It's like kind of that, like, suffering less, noticing it more. And then I was thinking about an analogy for, mindfulness and cultivating joy as that fuel for it. I grew up downhill ski racing, and the way you train is to be leaning forward and making early turns and always kind of looking down the fall line at the next gate so that you're making your turns early. And if you get and you're leaning forward, pushing into the front of your boots, and if you get too far, you get thrown back, you start turning later and you'll miss the gate. That's the same kind of thing with mindfulness. I feel like if you're like leaning forward, you're forward thinking, you're always, you'll be able to see those things come up and adjust for them quicker. If you get in the back seat, you get lazy, and then an emotion or something comes up, or a sankara of some sort, and it takes a lot longer to get out of it. It takes a lot longer to process it. It takes a lot longer to like get it out. Like it'll just sit there and fester if you're not looking straight ahead,
Yes,
taking it in.
exactly. In fact, that backseat driving kind of analogy that you used is what I would call, and it's got a term for it. They actually advertise it. It's called choiceless awareness. In other words, you go ahead and have a wreck, and then you try to justify that it was okay to have a mental wreck.
Yeah. Right.
But forward thinking is like being out in the road, and then you see a Mack truck bearing down on you. The right thing to do is to just step out of the way. The easy thing to do. Oh, I saw that, and let it go. But many people will, let us say, do the Popeye routine and stand in the middle of the road with their stiff arm out, trying to stop the Mack truck, which is literally going to not just break their arm, but it's going to run over them anyway.
Right.
And this is what we look at as working too hard. And that I see that often on Reddit. Well, I don't know. I'm not on Reddit, but that's one of the things that I have seen and people tell me about. Even students, and generally they work too hard because the book kind of hypes things up, gets them interested and curious, and so rather than having the ability to see the dukkha and step out of the way, which is what you're talking about, whereas now it's not so big anymore, but it comes more often because we're watching.
Right.
That generally the students will work too hard and complain about what a monkey mind it is and become discouraged. So both of these students, those that practice not enough, the and those that are working too hard wind up they don't continue in the practice. They sort of get sloppy and it's not important anymore, and they don't do retreats much and that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
But the middle path, this middle path is the middle path of one's right view. When right view becomes noble right view, effort, noble right effort. When the effort becomes noble, then it's very minimal. There's not a lot of effort to it. And when that right noble effort becomes part of the Sambhojana, or an enlightenment factor, it has two qualities. One is that it's unremitting. It keeps coming because your mindfulness is unremitting now, and your investigation is unremitting. And then you see that stuff, and then you want to do something about it. But now the effort is almost spring loaded.
Right.
So that it's not effort. Now it is nothing. There's nothing else to do. It's automatic. It becomes energetic, in fact.
Right. You've
So
developed that muscle so much that it's like it's easy to lift that load of effort. Or it's just reactive, where you say spring loaded, like jumping in to take care of it.
Okay. But we still need to continue to remember to put, even though it's very little effort, we need to remember to keep putting in effort. Is like another drop of joy, another tick of joy. This is what the Buddha used as his analogy to the first jhana. He used it in the sense of bath powder. And that the man who does the bath powder will take and sprinkle it with water. Now, my grandmother made biscuits. And so the analogy that I can see is watching her dip her hands in that bowl of water and then sprinkling the water on the dough or on the flour until it gets just enough water on it so that it's solid. It's now dough. Not one bit of that dough is not wet, but it's not so wet that you can wring it out and it drips. That it is a ball. It's malleable, but it's one thing. That's the important thing. You see, the soap powder or bath powder and the flour that my grandmother used was all ground up into very tiny little particles. So it was a crowd. But now that we put the water drops on it, now it becomes a ball. It's now become reunified in a new way. And that unification then is happening because of the sprinkling of the joy that we keep putting on. So keep adding that joy every time you can remember it. And that joy then is with what we would call step 10 of Anapanasati, that starts with, oh, I see that mind wandering away, or aha, I caught you. And that we should do that whenever something comes up. But generally, when we just come back, it's is kind of the sound that we make, other than caught you or whatever.
Right.
Because the effort is so easy that it's like, relax. But we don't even have the word relax. It's just that easy to change the mind from whatever it was.
Right.
And so this is one's right effort. And you were talking about it in the sense of looking forward to it, or having your sati really on the ball.
Right.
Also, when you said that, it reminded me of my early days, that one of my friends recommended this, and it really did improve things. He said it like this: the further down the road you can see, the faster you can go.
Right.
So if there's a curve up ahead, you can't see around the road. You got to slow down. Or if you can see way down the road, you can see the traffic, you can begin to map in advance the traffic flow as it's happening, so you can plan your weaving in and out as you're passing things. Because when you get, for instance, when you're behind a truck, you can't see anything. Don't ever stay behind a truck.
Right. Yeah. Which is, yeah, getting distracted.
It's better to back off and let somebody else pass you, and now you can see around better, and then you can pass them both at the same time. Now, I always have a motorcycle mentality, and things are a little bit different for four-wheel vehicles, but you don't want to stay behind a truck.
Yeah.
You either pass him or back off. But that's that whole point that I'm making is that the further down the road we see, or the sooner we're seeing what's happening as it arises in the mind, the easier we can deal with it. This is precisely, in fact, why Paticca Samuppada is taught in forward order, but it is practiced in reverse order.
Yeah.
Okay, it's practiced in forward order because it means this causes that, and that causes the next thing. And perception causes a mental construction that's different than the outside world's construction. And then that's what contacts us. And then that's what gives rise to feelings. And when we like it, then we want it. And when we want it enough, then we got to have it. And so there's that sequence of events in the Paticca Samuppada. So basically what you're saying is that as you're getting a little faster at this, you're beginning to see what's happening in the mind sooner and sooner. You're looking actually further down the road.
Right. You're looking backwards in Paticca Samuppada to, yeah, further down into the mind and how it works and how things unfold. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now you're doing it on a kind of natural level, to where when I was just speaking about it, I was speaking about it very tersely, but I was also talking about it in the formality of it. But the way that's to be practiced is much more the natural thing, in the sense of look at what you're doing and see whatever you can see, rather than I have to see this or I have to see that. It's very much like the game of whack-a-mole. If there is one whack-a-mole that really is fast, then people will start to pay attention to it, which means that they're not looking at all the other whack-a-moles, and so they begin to miss things because they're paying too close attention.
Yeah.
But when we're able to see on down the road like that, then we can see things as they come up much better. And so congratulations, you're beginning to experience good practice.
All right.
I think now you kind of understand what I was telling you before about the witness, that you're actually just being the witness who's seeing, rather the witness that's telling a story about it.
Right.
On the witness stand.
Yeah.
And so many people, when they take the Mahasi course, they begin to think of noting as that second kind of witness, of telling a story about what's happening. And when we do that, we're not watching what's going down, what's happening now. We're busy telling a story about what happened an instant ago.
Yeah, that's one thing I'm kind of critical of in that. And they keep telling you to do, just focus on the breath and then note sensations. And then it's like, well, at some point, there's probably people that could be progressing faster or be more mindful if they just sat with their senses instead of trying to do that. But I guess it does help in the beginning. But as you were saying, I think in that interview or maybe in another video I watched, that when people are all in a treatment like that and you only have 10 minutes here and there with the sayadaw, that people, it's harder to track people's progress than except for like like how we're talking here, where we can one-on-one, like how you were saying, Dhamma is best taught one-on-one.
Yes, and an additional problem is that when people only get 10 minutes or so, then they try to plan in advance of what they're going to do in that 10 minutes rather than let the guru do his thing. You want to try to manage. And so another thing about it is that then that time with the guru starts to become precious. It's special because you don't have much of it.
Right.
But if you lived with the Sayadaw, then you would begin to see that his ordinary teachings truly are ordinary because you can get them when you need them. And so that's one of the disadvantages of having those short interviews with a teacher in a retreat. But there's something else. And the something else is that almost all of the retreats, sometimes even those that are labeled and advertised as retreats for advanced students, all the retreats are still geared toward the beginner. And that storytelling about the noting is what has gotten stuck within the Mahasi tradition, is because it's a beginner's technique. And that was one of the things that I eventually saw with Goenka retreats, is that every retreat that I did was geared towards beginners. Every time.
Right.
And so it's going to remain that way so long as, in fact, the teachers even get into the habit of it being a beginner's retreat, and they do the same thing on Monday and the same thing on Tuesday that they did in the last retreat, etc. So with that, it's better to have an individual teacher, even if you're doing nothing but coming and reporting that you've gotten good results.
Right.
Because it still needs what you call a debriefing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I also noticed, I mean, because you were telling me, go in there with feeling successful, and so I really ramped it up, and I was like, first few days smiling, and like I was sitting in the dining hall looking around, like no one else is smiling. They probably think, like, what is this guy? Is he even really practicing? He doesn't look like he's practicing hard enough. He's smiling. I don't know. It's just weird. I mean, it's too bad. I mean, because it seems to just attract a lot of people to like stew in their stuff.
Well, there's two things with that. One is that you're an older student. You've had retreats before, and also you've been doing a lot of stuff with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other side of it is that you know the value of the joy, and so you're bringing it in to where normally the retreat for the beginner, all retreats have this quality. Is the idea is that if you're going to get the student in touch with his own mind, then you want to take away all of the stuff that keeps him from being in touch with his own mind. No books, no TV, no cell phones, no writing pads or pencils, and no talking. That in fact, talking is a major problem, because generally the students will break their silence in order to gush about how wonderful this was, and then they'll expand it, and then they'll make it grandiose, and then they'll shut up, and they go back into the retreat. And now the one who had an experience is trying to recreate the experience that he talked about rather than the experience that he had.
Right.
While the student who listened to him brag is now going to try to match it. And so that's one of the major reasons why no talking is such a good rule. Is just, if you're going to talk, let's talk real with the teacher. But then we should be able to have more access to the teacher so that we can explain things better. And so That takes a lot out of the teacher.
Yeah, because there was probably 35 people on the retreat or so, and there were two side Aws, but there was kind of like a younger side Aw who wasn't doing any of the interviews. He was just there, probably learning, and practicing himself. But yeah, the abbot, yeah, he was the only one meeting with. So he had to meet with everybody, throughout the week. So it probably did, take a lot out of him. But yeah, overall a great retreat center, and yeah, I've been there twice, and I really like it quite a lot. And it was a very good experience for sure.
Mm. So going back to that point about having everything taken away, the students, beginners especially, have been so relying upon getting their, if I can say it like this, getting their jollies off of their cookies. When they don't have any cookies anymore, they don't know how to create any jollies. And so the first retreat that a person does is often full of anxiety. It's prone to a sad face. They work too hard, or they're not working hard enough. And so generally the first retreat, instead of being a raucous success like it is for very few, it winds up being kind of a failure. The students feel like that they're a failure, even if they're actually getting stuff out of it. And so coming out of retreat feeling like you really got a lot of stuff out of it, that's the winner's attitude. That's what should be encouraged for each one of the students, that this was really valuable, really worthwhile. That whatever struggles I put myself through, I saw those struggles and stopped doing it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I know there's just some, yeah, really sad faces in there, and I don't know, like, the compassion in me was like, it doesn't have, I just want to like tell them, it doesn't have to be like this, but it's noble silence, and I can't tell you. It's, I hope they'll find their way, but.
Well, that's good to hear. What you're saying is even though the staff was encouraging them, they still were sad sacks. They weren't quite getting just the right words for that encouragement, and so they.
Well, the Mahasi lineage is kind of rigid and cold, anyways. I mean, as much as I think it's like a great technique. I mean, all the Dhamma talks were very, very dry and very much kind of talking about suffering and why people suffer, and not really talking about how to get out of it, but just, it's more like investigating suffering, sitting with suffering, not getting out of suffering. It's more like you learning, you're understanding it. So it's so much about kind of, dwelling in it, and not so much about getting out of it, or a way of pushing it aside, or a way of yeah.
That might be cultural.
Okay.
In the sense that if the Asians are taught to look at the suffering, they'll just naturally back off, to where the Westerners, when they see the suffering, they want to charge it.
Interesting.
And so there's also a possibility, and that is this. I don't know the side of it, because I know I did not meet Mahasi, that he had died basically about the time that I heard about him. And so I never spent a time with Mahasi. But I did, soon after that, take a retreat with U Pandita. And he was the one who took the lineage from Mahasi Sayadaw, and it was through him that it really got spread.
Right.
I have a feeling, because I've been with him, I've been around him, I know him, that it was his personality that bled through the teachings. so that it winds up being too much effort rather than just the right amount of effort to get out of suffering. We charge right into it. That was my experience with him, and I think that would be what I would call the Mahasi method, Upandita style, rather than whatever it was that Mahasi really taught. That I have met Burmese monks who did not have that quality, and in fact, there is a Westerner who went to Burma, ordained in Burma, stays in Burma, but he does travel a bit. But he's a big Bhikkhu Buddhadasa fan.
Great.
And that he has actually done video recordings for the Bhikkhu Buddhadasa group in Bangkok. So that's how I know about him. All right. So that does not mean that all of the Burmese a la Vipassana with Mahasi is, in fact, that heavy, rigid element to it.
Well, yeah, it was interesting, though, because then away from the Dhamma talk, Sayadaw U Tuzana, he's just like a glowing, lovely...
A delight. Of course, I wouldn't expect anything else from him.
In the interview, he would just, be like giggly and warm and be like, in his thick Burmese accent, like, yes, Nicholas, precious moment, Nicholas. He was a lovely old monk, and he was actually an assistant to U Pandita, like back in the early 2000s at that Malaysian Buddhist center. But yeah, I mean, he was a delight. But I always thought it was so interesting during the Dhamma talk. He was very serious, and he was reading, just reading off of something that he had written or whatever, and reading slowly because English is like his probably third language, and he was, but very serious. But then once he was out of the hall and you see him in the dining hall or wherever, he was just always like, like really like lovely and but it's interesting.
Thank you for telling that part of the story. That just fits in with what I had already seen.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, that's the whole quality of becoming a monk or a lay Dhamma dude, is to get out of the formality, to get out of all of the heaviness, and just enjoy the moment. This is he's right. This is a precious moment. This one too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there was a lot of rebirth dogma in the Dhamma talks, as you might expect. But I was kind of surprised. I didn't think he was going to go there. And then like a couple days in, he started talking about it, transmigration of consciousness and all that, which is what it is, I guess.
Well, it does transmigrate, if you want to use that word, from one moment to the next. It stops and then it starts up again, and then it stops and we go to sleep, and then it starts up again and we wake up. But this taking another body kind of stuff is not what the Buddha taught.
Yeah.
That I think that I mentioned before, that the teaching of the Buddha was actually quite good up until the time of Asok, which is about 150 years or so after the time of the Buddha. And Asok was the great grandson of the young monk who actually provided for the first council. And so when Asok made Buddhism now into a state religion, that started bringing so many followers so fast that he really wasn't able to, or that the Sangha themselves, the teachers that were available, couldn't handle all of the students. Hang on a second.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, Tam, I want to call. Can I talk to you later? All right. So in the time of Asok, uh, they didn't have, it's almost like the mass production of having one retreat after another, after another, after another. And then the retreat students don't stay around a teacher long enough to really get the deeper part of the Dhamma. And so now the students start learning from themselves and teaching each other what they already believed before. And so that's what got started in the time of Asok. So there's always been a Mahasangha around a noble Sangha, or the Hinayana. The small boat is not in the sense that the Mahayana has the idea that we're all in the same boat together, but nobody's going anywhere because we're fighting about which way the boat's going to go. To where in the Hinayana, or the small vessel, that's when each student can spend time with the teacher so that the real noble Dhamma continues on. And that's been the case all along. There's always been a noble Sangha within the greater Sangha. And you could also imagine that, well, in a way that happened in the time of the Buddha also, because there were people who were coming to the Buddha and ordaining because they liked him so much. And it wasn't until after they ordained that they really got what the actual teachings were. To where many others, they would take him on as a lay disciple and find out what the actual teachings were, and then they would ordain. But in the beginning, you would always have those, and especially the lay people who would come to the Buddha to ask questions. He would fit into their model. In other words, he knew Brahmins were Brahmins, and so he would talk to the Brahmins in a way to get them, let us say, to trust him, to know that he was a good teacher. And primarily what he taught was that whatever you believe about rebirth and the heavens and the hells, all of that is dependent upon your behavior, the sila, the way you act. And the way you act is according to the way you think. It's only later when they begin to find out that these heavens and these hell worlds and all of that are really all about the way you think.
Yep.
And so that separation was there from the beginning. The ones who were not yet noble, and then those who were able to become noble became noble, but many did not. And that really got big in the time of Asok. So fast forward, let us say another 700 or 800 years, and this is the time of Buddhaghosa. Now the question is, did he really understand the teachings of the Buddha? There's every indication that he did, but that he wrote the book to mislead. That he did not want the Buddhist monks around his hometown and environs to become noble. He wanted them to stay the way that they were, because that meant that the Buddhists could fit in with the Brahmin society of the time. And they weren't a threat. They weren't a problem. They were just part of the crowd. But if the noble teaching is spoken up, then people start to become nobles. They stop paying any attention to the Brahmins at all. And so Bhikkhu Buddhaghosa, in fact, probably knew what it meant to be a Sotapan, but he doesn't at all want anyone to become noble, to become a Sotapan. There is also an additional issue, and this is actually quite a big one, and that is that if the noble Dhamma is taught to someone before they're ready, they will then get the idea that boils down to one statement. We're talking about the law of karma, and their opinion then becomes, well, I can get away with it. In other words, if they've been raised their whole life that they're going to have to pay for their bad deeds, they better start, and they're going to have to pay for it, even if the common machine has to dig them up out of something another 300 years ago just to spank them.
Mhm.
You're going to get yours, okay? But the teaching of the Dhamma says, wait a minute, we're not quite so sure about that. And then the wrong attitude people will then get the idea that, oh, that means that I can get away with anything. And there were, in fact, monks and teachers in the time of the Buddha who actually taught that. They would teach a version of no self that did not have any karma in it at all. But there's a difference then between the hard karma of there is only right action or wrong action, and always good action will give good results. And there is bad action that will always give bad results. But if you think about it just a bit, we recognize that, wait a minute, oftentimes the goodness or badness of the action is not dependent upon the action itself, it's dependent upon the results. In other words, if you invest money on the stock market and then the stock goes up, then you think that that was a good action. And if the stock market goes down, then you think that it was a bad action. And it also has to do with the kind of opinions that people have. For instance, the flag goes on the play, and half the crowd stands up and roars in hatred because they don't like it, and the other half of the crowd stands and cheers because they like that play. All right. So, was that flag thrown on the play? Was that a good action or a bad action?
Both.
Both. Exactly. That's the answer. Exactly. It was both a good and a bad action. All right. So this kind of karma is noble karma, or noble understanding of action. So the right way to look at it in the sense of ordinary right view is that you are responsible for your behavior no matter what. And then wrong belief or wrong view would be that, oh, I can get away with it because there are no monks and nuns. There is no mother, father. There is no this world and the other world. And I can go do what I want to do without having to experience the results of my good or bad action. But then what they don't know, because they're not looking, is that almost all of their new bad action is going to be predicated on bad feelings. And so this is the danger of letting the actual real karma teaching of the Buddha out to the public world.
Right.
It's better if the students, if they're going to behave that way, not spend much time with the teacher. They'll come and get one thing and then they'll go off, but they'll forget about it and they'll be going back to their ways, and that's okay. But when students come, we've got to bring them then, when they keep coming, is to bring them into the noble right view, is that everything is subject to dukkha, and your job is to investigate that dukkha. And that when the mind becomes noble, when the mind is unified, when you get to the noble mind that is practicing the eightfold noble path, especially right sati, right view, right attitude, and the right effort that it takes to get that right attitude. When one is practicing correctly, the mind becomes unified, they become a whole human being, and then with that noble mind, their behavior becomes noble. But for the children who are in the beginning of practice, they are taught this stuff about rebirth and reincarnation in order to sort of help them put their mind in a straitjacket
Right.
to force it to have right behavior. Now, you can probably understand that it is quite possible for someone to have really good behavior, at least most of the time on the surface, while feeling really bad on the inside. In fact, I think that that's what happens to most Christians when they become a preacher. And eventually they begin to come to the point that, well, wait a minute, I'm not really sure about all this Christianity anyway. And then they begin to think I can get away with it. And then the next thing you know is you'll have either sexual abuse or robbing the till or whatever like that the preachers become criminals.
Yeah.
But they don't think so. Many times, even when they're caught at it. And so naturally, they're going to have a particular, let us say, worldview about how things are. And so this is one of the major reasons why Christianity is part of the Republican Party, is because of the concept, I can get away with it.
Yeah.
When in fact, the noble recognizes, hey, wait a minute, I'm not even getting away with it now. Let me put those thoughts aside.
Right.
But in the beginning, at the let us say in the church pew, they want to teach the children right action leads to right results, or good action leads to good results, and bad action that gives to bad results. Therefore, you should train your mind to do good rather than work at how you feel. If you can get your feelings straightened out, your behavior will be great. You can get your behavior straightened out and still feel rotten. Now let's go back to the Buddha for just a moment and recognize that basically what he was doing is he was going along to getting along, or another way of saying it is that he was pacing until he's leading. So when you have Burmese giving Dhamma to Westerners, they're not actually giving Dhamma to Westerners, they're giving Dhamma to the Burmese, the tradition that they were raised in. And that they actually are following along with the teachings of the Buddha in the sense of the pacing and leading. An example of that was my friend David, when he was a monk, he told the story when he came back from Malaysia. He had to go get his visa there. And while he was there, he stopped into the Big Thai temple, or Wat, in Kuala Lumpur. And he went to see the abbot, who happened to have been Sri Lankan, but he was speaking English to this Chinese woman who had just lost her husband. And when David overheard that conversation, he says, wow, I don't want anything to do with this guy. He is just totally into rebirth. But after that conversation, David said that he turned around to see David, and David told him that he had just come from Wat Suan Mok. And this guy got a big grin on his face, and it was like a complete change. All right. So it is quite possible for the monks to know the real Dhamma, but still teach the beginner's Dhamma, even in a meditation retreat, because they expect the students to already believe that stuff. Unfortunately, that's not true for Westerners. For Westerners, they begin to take that on as a new dogma.
Yeah.
So we need to watch more closely about how the Burmese or the Asians are trying to teach Dhamma. And then, in fact, even the Buddha mentioned that in Sutta number 139, he's talking about, in the Majjhima Nikaya, he's talking about how to teach the Dhamma without teaching it one-on-one, in the sense of, you're a bad boy, you stop doing that. This is the precept. Is not the right way to teach it. We teach it kind of in the abstract. But another way that we have to work is we have to speak the language of the student. And for this reason, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa did want Westerners to teach Westerners. It's better for a Westerner to not quite know the Dhamma and teach the Westerners what he does know than for an Asian to teach the Dhamma the way he would teach the Dhamma in Asia. And this is one of those examples that there is in the suttas that the Buddha did pace and lead. And so now the Westerners will go and read that, and then they'll show it up and say, see, the Buddha taught rebirth. No, he is teaching Sila to those who believe in rebirth. There's a complete difference in that.
Right.
And so when we understand it like that, and we understand what happened in the time of Buddhaghosa and in the time of Ashoka, we can understand that Buddhaghosa was in fact teaching from the beginner's position. Now, was he teaching from the beginner's position? That, by the way, the whole book is full of magic, including the Visuddhimagga. It looks like he was trying to straddle the fence. He was trying to teach both the beginners and the advanced all at the same time.
Yeah, because there's like a bunch of there's all those casinas, which are just like concentration practices. There's a lot of just like meditation technology in there and map theory, really. I mean, I've just skimmed through it, really, but yeah, well, it seems like it's just, yeah, there's a lot of complicated stuff going on there. I'm actually curious enough to like read it just to like see where you're coming from on all this. But yeah, I've only really heard anything, most of what I know about it is like secondhand. So.
Okay. Well, there's one point in there where he breaks down the Paticca Samuppada into 3 lifetimes. And he does it at a particular place. The first 2 is the old past, the sankharas that are built up and all of the ignorance. And then the present life is this consciousness up through grasping and clinging, upadana tanha. And then he breaks it again as at the jati and the birth and the suffering as the future life. Well, in a way, he was right. And that is only we need to understand what the Buddha meant by a lifetime. Because everything that's happened up until the immediate past moment is the past. And in this current moment, and if in fact we have feelings that lead to suffering, then that next moment is going to be a new life that's born as selfishness. And that can happen within a second or so. The past, the present, and the future all happens within about 3 seconds.
Do you think Buddhaghosa was what he was meant to imply anyways, and it was just, as you say, like,
that it was he was writing totally allegorically?
Yeah, like how you call it.
I would say that if he got caught, that would be his answer, that all this was all allegorical. Okay. But unfortunately, because he wrote it when he was in Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankans, by and large, really cleave to the Visuddhimagga, more so than they do in Burma. That does not mean that there are no nobles in Sri Lanka, because in fact I just mentioned one who was in fact noble. That even in Sri Lanka, that the noble teachings still exist, and there are nobles. That was really kind of a wake up for me. That's one of the later wake-ups, because the first thing that I had thought was that, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is just super special. Then I began to find out, oh no, the lineage that he was in was the special part, and that it was widespread in Thailand, but he opened it up and made it fully widespread. And that's why so many of the senior monks throughout Thailand became students of his, including Ajahn Chah. Another student of his, and this is quite remarkable, but it's actually provable, that the Dalai Lama was a student of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and came to Wat Suan Mok. So here I am saying, okay, I'm opening my eyes. It's not that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is the only noble. Oh no, nobility is widespread in Thailand. And then I had, when I was in the United States as a monk, don't want to tell too much of the details of the story, but I wound up having a Laotian young monk who did not speak Lao very well, but he ordained because his uncle ordained, and the family pressure put it on that he's got ordained to take care of his uncle. And so he became my student in English. When he reported back to his uncle and the other uncle, who happened to have been one of the most important Lao monks in the United States in Denver, I get summoned to Denver. That the surprise was more on their end. How could it possibly be that a Westerner actually knows the Noble Dhamma? To where with me, I was really surprised. How can the Lao know the Noble Dhamma?
Right, right.
And then from that, I also met Sri Lankans in North Carolina, as well as Burmese monks in North Carolina, and that nobility is widespread within the Sangha, especially those who have been monks more than 10 or 20 years. That the real nobility is alive and well within the Sangha, but it is not let out to the lay community. It's not even let out to the younger monks. They've got to be at the right place at the right time, asking the right questions. And so what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa did, he got into trouble by breaking that rule. Oh no, let's let it out there. Let's let the danger come that there are some people that are going to hear it and become really bad actors, and there's a lot of others who are going to get real value out of it. And so that's why he got into trouble. But the outcome of that Sangha Dasesa was that he was teaching the right Dhamma to the wrong people.
Yeah.
That was the outcome, which means that he's not teaching it to only monks. He's teaching it to the lay people. What he did was he gave a lecture at a nursing school, like the graduation ceremony. And he's all about emptiness and anatta and not giving the traditional talk. And people in the audience, they knew what he was saying. And so they got really upset about it. It's almost like, imagine that a preacher in the United States started really preaching the teachings of Jesus in the sense of going against the teachings of Christianity.
Okay.
There are some Christians who say, yeah, he's teaching the right thing, but I wish he'd shut up.
They're not going to go vote now.
Yeah, because if they really hear what Jesus says about the poor and the homeless and all of that kind of stuff, then they're not going to go vote for Trump. So let's keep the real teachings of Jesus under wraps. Let's promote Christianity. Well, that's also two parts of Buddhism, except that the noble quality in Buddhism is much stronger, but a lot of people don't know it. To where the noble qualities of Christianity is almost non-existent.
Yeah, it seems like I see what you're saying about why they wouldn't want to let it out to the lay. It's almost like, yeah, you'll know it if you come around and it comes to you naturally, because we're not going to give it to people who aren't ready to hear it, and they'll take it the wrong way and not investigate their suffering, and they'll be on the wrong path because they need these precepts and they need these teachings of karma to get them to a point where they're ready to hear the noble teachings, or else they could be sidetracked because their mind isn't noble enough to know what the world is about.
Well, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa had the idea, well, let's take that chance, because now it's time, after 2,500 years, let's actually start teaching the teachings of the Buddha openly, the way that he did, rather than having it hidden away in the Sangha. That, in fact, back to that point about the Sri Lankan monk and Kuala Lumpur, the same can be said about the Dalai Lama. That if people ask him questions about rebirth and all of that, then they will get an answer from him about that. But if you ask him noble questions, he will give you noble answers. And he's got a fine line to walk. I mean, he just could not come out. But Bhikkhu Buddhadasa had already done that. And so Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, he don't have any of that truck. If you ask him ordinary questions, he's going to put you in your place with it. Because his whole teaching is noble. And we're all should feel very grateful to him of letting that out. Because otherwise, the Western Buddhists don't have very much of an opportunity of really getting it. That the Sangha, the way the Bhikkhu Sangha operates worldwide is very Asian, and that Westerners don't fit into that very well. That in fact, if I were going to start, and I'm not having an issue of it, I would start basically by building a hoboville. Let's just all go live out in the woods. Let's leave society completely. Let's just go have a ball in the woods.
Right.
That way we can live the way that they did in the time of the Buddha. And so that would be a way of living the Dhamma. But you see, we don't have that. You've either got to join the established Asian Sangha, or you have to remain a layman and therefore not have any advantage towards hearing the Noble Dhamma. And so we're all grateful for Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and the tribulations that he went through in the 1930s to let's open this stuff up. Maybe eventually even the Mahasi teachers will stop teaching an Asian teaching for Asian children to Western adults. It's not necessary to teach rebirth and reincarnation. That's actually a hindrance, especially if people start to believe it.
Yeah, I at that retreat, it seemed like most of the retreat participants were of Asian descent, and most of them women, some and middle-aged, and some men too. But you could tell the ones that were just like very religious, and like out, like I'd be on walking meditations, so they would be like, chanting like out by themselves, like, try like, you could tell like the ones that were very like religious and probably did have that kind of, ordinary way of looking at the teachings. And, but I don't know. That was just what I could kind of gather. I'm not so sure because I don't know the culture that well.
I understand, but you do. That's interesting. That most of the people at that retreat were Asians. That I find that curious.
Well, it's in the Vietnamese area, part of San Jose. Like if you go drive around it, it's it's an immigrant community. I think it's not just Vietnamese, but Thai and Hispanic too. Like when I got there, like I heard like a mariachi band playing over. So it's like, and I could tell it's people from around. But yeah, there was only like maybe out of the 35 people, there's maybe like 5 of us who are of European descent. The rest were of Asian descent. And some of them and then they would translate so the Burmese abbot would give the Dhamma talk in English, and then the retreat coordinator, she would translate and then give it in Vietnamese. And there was like a good many of people that would stay and hear it in Vietnamese. So I don't know if they just didn't speak English very well. I mean, the guy's accent, his Burmese accent is so thick that I could barely, it's very hard for me to understand some of the English words that he was saying. So I could imagine for someone who wasn't their first language, that it would be difficult. So yeah, I mean but there was definitely some people that are very, very religious and like, just really, getting into it. And,
Vietnam is very, very curious in its Buddhism because many years ago, I'm not sure exactly when, but it was a long, long time ago, that the government forced the Mahayana and the Theravada to get along with each other.
Hmm.
And so they have actually done so to the point of being fused together. The story that I love to tell is that at one of the big Watts or Vietnamese temples in Charlotte, North Carolina, one of the monks was ordained Mahayana, but he dressed in Theravada robes because he went from a Mahayana into a Theravada setting and he stayed there. And so he changed robes. And then he comes to the United States, he continues to wear the same robes. The exact opposite happened to the other monk, which means that he was ordained as Theravada, but he's wearing Mahayana robes, which was enormously confusing even for the Theravada monks in North Carolina who he was associating with.
Interesting.
Such is the nature of the Buddhism in Vietnam. So, in that regard, the Vietnamese don't now, the newer generations don't even see any distinction at all. Meanwhile, the Vietnamese government and also mostly the U.S. government, they're not going to let Vietnamese come to the United States. They still got their nose up in the air about it. Both governments. Neither the communist government want to lose their monks, nor is the U.S. going to allow them, which means now the Vietnamese have trouble getting enough monks. The same is true for the Laotians, for the same reasons exactly. And so because of that, a lot of Lao temples will have Thai monks in them in the United States. But in your case, you have a visiting Burmese Sayadaw coming and teaching to the lay people in San Diego. Now you understand this is why. This is why you have a Sayadaw there, is because it's really hard for them to get Burmese, or excuse me, any kind of monks out of Vietnam.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know. Yeah, because Utuzana is definitely Burmese. I don't know if the other Sayadaw was also Burmese. I don't know. They had before they had a Sayadaw before that was there for a long time. Who passed away, and I think that's when Utuzana took over. But I don't know if he was Burmese. I mean, it's Mahasi lineage. I have to assume that they're all Burmese. Because I know that like U Pandita had visited that retreat center, and well, there was one the last retreat I went to there. Sayadaw Kipapano, he was Vietnamese, so in the Mahasi lineage. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And he would give his Dhamma talks in Vietnamese, and then they would translate to English. So I guess it wasn't just Burmese. I think it's maybe they let him come over temporarily, but he couldn't stay, and they probably would get them to stay if they could. I mean, that's what you're talking about, where the U.S. won't let, and only let them visit and not stay.
Well, what you're telling me, I'm really pleased with. I would prefer all of the Westerners in the West, in the U.S., to find retreat centers and or local temples that actually have monks, rather than go to Westerners who had a Western teacher, and that Western teacher may or may not spent a year or two in Asia, but that is better than for the Westerners to be around the monks. I would very much prefer that.
Yeah.
That they're much more likely to run across a noble in a temple than they are to run across, because I ran across a lot of them. There's a lot of nobles. Many of them don't speak enough English. And many of them also will assume, because this is a new arrival to their temple, that they're going to teach them step one first, which is rebirth, reincarnation, karma, and right behavior and all of that kind of stuff. And then that student is going to be confused and think, oh, well, this guy's not noble because he's teaching me beginner's literature. But if you go and say, hey, I've heard that before, but I've also heard the noble Dhamma, do you know the noble Dhamma? And that's the right attitude to take. And then you can find a noble teacher. I'm imagining that most noble teachers in the United States who are hidden away in the various temples will be as shocked to find a noble Western student as they were to find me.
Yeah.
It's like Western Buddhism. Here's another thing about that that's very curious. And that is, as Buddhism spread throughout Asia, it was always spread by nobles. Bodhidharma and others were spreading the Dhamma. There are stories in the sutras about getting a monk ready, and when the Buddha thought he was ready, okay, he can go out. And the time of Ashoka, they sent monks out to eventually even to Japan. But it was always the noble lineage that came, which meant that around that noble is going to be the crust of ordinary religion, but a few nobles are going to come out of that core. That did not happen in the West. The West, Buddhism was spread by Christians. Alan Watts was trained as a Christian, and he was, over the course of his life, he became noble, but he became famous before he became noble. The same thing is true with Jack and Joseph and Sharon and all of that crowd is that the nobility that they have now has come very, very late in their life, that they all got started by teaching ordinary Buddhism. And so in that regard, ordinary Buddhism is all we find in Western Buddhism. Very, very, very rare is the noble Dhamma found within Western Buddhism. But then you have this pragmatic Dhamma kind of crowd that's saying, wait a minute, Mr. Buddhist religion, Western Buddhism, you're full of crap.
Yeah.
Let's go back and find what the Buddha really taught. But they're completely ignorant of the fact that there are people who knew what the Buddha taught all along. They see themselves as special because they're rejecting Western Buddhism, but they don't realize that, hey, they could come and find the noble Dhamma fairly easily if they would go looking for it, rather than trying to figure it out for themselves.
Right.
And so that's the state of Western Buddhism right now. And most of them are still stuck at that introductory level of good action gives good results and bad action gives bad result. And they don't come to that third kind of Buddhism or the third kind of karma, which was, wait a minute, this is all a big freaking mess depending upon attitude, that it has more to do with judgment than it has to do with what is actually a right action and what is actually a wrong action. But then the Buddha, after he actually with that destroyed the original laws of karma, now he's coming up with an actual fourth kind of karma that is liberating. Do you know what that fourth kind of karma is? All right, it's the kind of karma that's neither bright nor dark, that gives results that are neither bright nor dark. Now we're talking about action, not mental motivation, in the sense that once you start looking for dukkha and seeing it around, you're less likely to actually cause dukkha. And so therefore you are intentionally refraining from intentional bad action. However, you also give up on that whole business about merit making, that you begin to live in the moment, that you don't do things now to get some sort of future result, that you recognize that everything that's useful is useful for right now. that actually goes kind of deep, because most Westerners are still under the belief that if they do a good job by their employer, they will get a paycheck or you will get a promotion. And that's not going, there's no guarantee in that. You may not get paid. They may, in fact, every company that goes bankrupt declares bankrupt either the day of or the day before payroll. So they don't have to make this payroll. They just fire everybody. You're fired. We're out of business. Goodbye. Get out of here. And no, you do not get paid for your last month's work. And so that part is to recognize that, oh, well, wait a minute. This business about doing good things to get later good results, there's something wrong with that. Let's start giving our action so that we get immediate results, like take a deep breath and feel good. We don't have to wait for the paycheck to feel good. We can feel good immediately. So with that kind of karma, it goes to the point that then the results that we get, we're not looking for results. That because we're not doing bad actions, we're not getting bad results. And because we're not trying to get good actions to give good results, then we stop seeing the results as good because of my action. And then the next part of that is that this is the kind of karma that leads to the end of karma. Let me repeat that. The fourth kind of karma is that's neither bright nor dark, leads to the end of action, the end of karma, which means eventually we stop working so hard. We eventually sit down and enjoy life. We eventually come to that Bushu haiku from Bushu was a guy who wrote it. It's Zen haiku, no place to go and nothing to do, and the spring comes and the grass grows by itself. And so that's actually the end of karma, that we just stop doing so much. We sit down and enjoy life. Or stand up and enjoy life.
Would that be the fourth noble truth then?
Pardon?
Would that be the fourth noble truth?
No, that's actually the fourth kind of karma, but you could see it in the fourth noble truth that in the very beginning of practice, we have to have right attitude, or excuse me, right view. The right view is it is better to meditate than it is to let the mind wander away. Okay, so that's one's right attitude. The next is right sati. That can we remember to watch the breath? Can we remember all of the rest of Anapanasati? And then one's right effort is to get out to see the dukkha. We were talking about this in the very first part of our talk. When we can see the dukkha, all we have to do is just step out of the way. Or in that case, throw that thought out of the mind by just taking the small step and putting something in the mind that's worthwhile happening, like, aha, I caught you, or wow, this is a good moment now that I don't have to think about her anymore. And that gives us then the right attitude, which is the attitude of a winner, the can do. We can do this. We can straighten out our lives. And so that's more of the fourth noble truth, is this is the path through right action, that gives right attitude based upon right view and right remembrance, or right sati. And when we practice that, it gives us a unified mind. And so when the mind is noble, now our behavior is going to be noble and exemplary. That, for instance, one who has a noble, unified mind is unlikely to lie because he knows that he's separating himself from the truth. That's a split. We're also free from doubt, because doubt keeps the mind from being unified. And so we be taking things that are not given. The only way that I can take things that are not given is because I want them. I want something I don't have. That's suffering. That's not unification of mind. And if I hate somebody bad enough to kill them, and I know that there's some pretty people very close to being noble who actually do want to kill Donald Trump. And so, but when the mind is actually noble, then we say, well, we'll let the people who want to kill him go kill him. I'm good without it. I'm okay whether he gets shot or impeached or stays in office. It don't matter. Don't matter to me. And so we begin to have a noble attitude about our behavior rather than I want to kill that son of a bitch, but I can't do it because then I'll have to suffer. I'll become an animal or something later. So just for my own good, I'm not going to kill him. But yeah. I imagine there's got to be somebody out there that says he can get away with it. And so this is why this Sila component is part of the Eightfold Noble Path, but it's a part of the Eightfold Noble Path as the resultant aspects of the path, not the beginning part of the path. That is at the beginning part of the path for those who are not yet noble. Once one is beginning to move out of ordinary life into the noble life, as he's going through the knowledges of Sotapan, he begins to get a mind that is noble. In other words, he doesn't behave that way, not because he thinks that he shouldn't or that he thinks that he'll get punished, but he recognizes, oh, I behave that way because I'm free from that.
Yeah, it's like the natural way of being because you're looking far enough down the road.
Exactly. That's exactly correct. Well, this has been a really interesting little Dhamma talk, and I really appreciate you filling me in on all the details of your Vipassana retreat.
Yeah. No, I was excited to talk to you. I wanted to give it a week for me to sort of see how I adjusted. But yeah, no, that was really good. I think I understood the whole nobility and, the little kid teachings versus nobility a little better. It's really fascinating. It's starting to all come together. I understand it a lot more than I did before the call. So it's
great. I'm glad that I was able to find that opening in your mind and plug this stuff right in.
Yeah.
Excellent, Nick. Well, I hope to see you soon.
Yeah. Until next time.
Go have a ball. Boogie on down the road.
Bye-bye.
Bye.